I'm going to make a few brief comments on the article, What is Web 2.0 by Tim O'Reilly. I hope you found it helpful. I think it's hard to find a good introductory article for this that wasn't too technical, but was also gave a broad overview. I think you could probably argue this was, at least in places, a little too technical. They were obviously writing to a crowd more generally programmers than maybe educators. So I thought it might be helpful if I go through a couple of the things that are discussed, and there are a few things that are discussed. I'll try to keep it brief, just to give some additional clarification and maybe my take on a few things. So one of the first issues, I guess, that comes up is this idea of how this all started out and how this originated. And of course, Tim talks about their conference, and I should say Tim O'Reilly, this O'Reilly Publishing, is well known for their technical books, and you've seen these all over the place. They often have rather intricate pictures of animals or drawings of animals on each one of their books, and I really find them to be the best overall. When I'm looking for a particular topic, I generally look for an O'Reilly book first. They're not going to necessarily be the cheapest, although not the most expensive either, but they're certainly the most thorough, and they're often written by the people that actually designed whatever the application is, so you can trust the content, and it's often pretty in-depth content. So he describes a little bit about how this came about in their sessions, in their initial discussions. And I think, at least in my sense, if not the originator of the term Web 2.0, certainly the idea behind it comes from Google, and more specifically from PageRank. So from the very beginning of Google, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, PhD students at Stanford, had this idea that there was a much better way to get good search results. And this might seem like a digression, but it's actually pretty foundational to everything else that has come about really since then. So what the traditional ways search engines would use to come up with their results is they would actually scan the net, and they would look for particular text that would match search queries. So they'd look for titles, and they'd look for headings, and then how many times did the term occur in the page. And then web designers would use like meta tags to somehow classify their pages. So if I'm looking for information on I don't know, T-Rex, I would, and I wanted, and I was a web designer, and I wanted my page to show up, I'd use the term T-Rex as much as possible. I would include it in the title. I would include it in as many headings, and then I'd just put the meta words in the background. I would just put those all over the place. And so I didn't and then when I type in the search query, it would take me to these places that just had the word T-Rex a lot. But they didn't really say anything about quality. And so what Google did, Google just did one subtle change, and they added this PageRank technology. And ultimately what PageRank is it looks for how many pages have linked back to that particular page. So if I find this wonderful site on T-Rex, and I'm interested in that area, and let's say I have a website around that, I am more likely to link to that particular site. Well, Google sees that I've linked to that site. They count that as a vote for that site. And those votes ultimately become the basis of their search results. Not how many times T-Rex showed up in the page, but how many times somebody linked to it. And then they can take that a little bit further, where if I have a popular site on dinosaurs, and a lot of people are linking to me, then when I link to something else, it actually shows up even higher. So you get to somewhat of a hierarchy. But ultimately, as most people have found, Google has the best results, and ultimately it comes back to this. Well, what's this have to Web 2.0 and these ideas? Well, by counting people's votes, they really changed the game. They helped, rather than having computers try to predict which would be the best page by looking at the content of the page and scanning it for this and that, Google said, no, we want to know what people think are the best page, and people are going to vote for things by linking to things. So ultimately, Google is a search engine based on people's votes as opposed to what computers might predict. So this was the beginning of this idea of harnessing some collective intelligence, and collective intelligence and the wisdom of crowds and some other these phrases you'll commonly hear when people are referring to Web 2.0, Web 2.0 applications. And so we'll spend a little bit of time talking about each one of these. Just to give a couple of examples, they mentioned these, Tim mentions these in the article, that's iTunes and TiVo. The idea is that by getting large numbers of people involved and people being able to somehow recommend things, that you can come up with better results and better outcomes. TiVo does this through a recommendation tool where when people are watching a show they can say thumbs up or thumbs down if they enjoy it, and by aggregating that data they can start to determine, hey, if this person likes this show, others who have liked this show also like this one. This is similar to Amazon's in a way. iTunes does similar things when it comes to searching for songs and music, and podcasts. And we'll talk a lot more about podcasts later in the course. But which, by the way, this I'm just going over the surface of a lot of these. Many of these things we will go into in more detail later on: podcasts, wikis, and blogs. Another phrase that you were introduced to in this article, or maybe you've heard it before, is the idea of this the long tail. And iTunes in one way is a great example of the long tail, in the sense that there are literally, I should know this number, but must be thousands, if not tens of thousands, of podcasts on iTunes. And quantity isn't great. What you really want is something that appeals to your particular interests. So we'll take me as an example. As a I have varied interests. Not too many left-handed overweight marathon runners out there. So you don't necessarily get programming that's tailored towards some of my specific interests. You don't see many shows on marathons, or in terms of technology, very few shows have made it related to technology. Tech TV was our only hope here in the States for a while, and that doesn't appear anymore. But you start getting online and looking at podcasts, and with a small population, you can still have a good podcast. This is that long tail. So rather than identifying the programming that's only going to appeal to millions of people, you can start doing programming that appeals to thousands of people, maybe even hundreds of people. I listen to a couple of podcasts very regularly. One that I'd imagine is listened to by thousands, but 100,000 might be pushing it, called Fidipidations, which is specifically geared towards runners, and I've learned a tremendous amount. But it's the type of thing that you wouldn't see in mainstream media. So that's part of the long tail, and in many ways, we are a part of the long tail in whatever our interests may be. And this is a way of hopefully opening up the media to some of our particular needs and more specific needs. One of the next concepts they describe, not in great detail, but they give a lot of different examples of, and this is the idea of a mashup. A mashup is taking two different data sets and bringing them together in a way that is useful. And a lot of this depends on people being open with their data. And Google has been one of those. It's a good example of a company that's been very open with their data and their tools, and then others can use that to their specific needs. So I'm going to go back to running as an example again here. And what you see here is a map from Google of the area around my home. So I want to go running. I have a schedule. I want to try to run so many miles a day. And how you used to do this is to develop routes, you'd get in your car and you'd try to keep track of how far something was. Well, of course, you run on trails and you got to cut corners and this and that, so it's a pain, to say the least. Well, what Google has, they have a great map tool, and then taking advantage of that, the USA Track and Field Association set up a site where you can take Google Maps data and you can draw these paths or routes within it, and it will automatically show you how far you've gone. So I do a starting point and I just kind of click my route. I run along Pebble here, and then I get onto a trail, and I follow that trail along, and I go up, across, down Wigwam, etc. But notice it gives me the mile marker. It also gives me the elevation, and then I can save each one of these too, and I can refer back to them. A wonderful example of a mashup that appealed to me. Lots of examples out there for other activities as well. You'll find now with Google Maps as well as Yahoo's Maps, they pull data from a lot of other sites as well to get things like restaurant reviews. You're looking at a map and you click on restaurants. This is Yahoo Maps, and they'll show you restaurants around there. You can pick specific cuisine, and then many of them also immediately give you reviews for them as well. And it's worth noting when it comes to mashups that the openness of data can't be underestimated. It's critical for this type of thing to happen. So rather than Google holding on tightly to this data, they open it up and allow others to use it and build upon it and make something better and more worthwhile. A similar argument can be made, I think, for content. And as educators, we're in a unique position where we spend a lot of money on content. We spend a tremendous amount on books and to some degree software that's delivering content. And the closed nature of this content makes it very, very difficult for us to move ahead, I think, in a reasonable way. And they allude to something called the Creative Commons, which we'll go into in more detail later in the course. But it's an incredibly important idea and movement. And in a nutshell, it's a way to combat this suffocating copyright law. So much of what the law as it currently exists was developed by people who want to hold on tightly to content, and they don't want it shared. They want people to be giving money at any point. Creative copyright law originated as something that would end after, I believe initially it was 7 years, maybe it's 14 years, and now we're to the point where it's essentially forever when something gets developed. So it never actually gets out into the wild, so to speak. Well, and think about some of the content that we as educators have put up there on the internet. As soon as we put something out there, it's immediately copyrighted, and without us doing anything, people would be in violation of copyright law if they utilized it in some manner. Well, most educators certainly aren't proponents of that, but that's essentially how the law is written. Well, Creative Commons has established some procedures and guidelines for easily making this content shareable in a manner that you find agreeable, and essentially then opened many of these things up. This was started by a lawyer named Lawrence Lessig, also out of Stanford, and he's written some wonderful books and has a wonderful blog discussing many of the issues around this. And actually, he did a interview for This Week in Tech too, which I'm going to try to find and post up on the site, that describes many of the issues involved with copyright and his attempt. We'll go back to this site too in this course and many other courses, because they have also not only mechanisms for opening things up, but also mechanisms for finding Creative Commons licensed materials. And in fact, most the search engines now will allow you to search based on Creative Commons licenses. So this means you can use images, audio, these types of things where people have provided the rights to use them in usually a pretty open manner. Along the same vein of the Creative Commons, this idea of open source. And open source refers to a development process where, rather than people working in closed doors, a small team, maybe even a large team, they work on a product and ultimately ship it out to the public, while still maintaining the proprietary nature of the programming, and in many ways no transparency at all, so people don't completely understand what's going on behind the scenes with a particular program. Here you have the icons or mascots, so to speak, of two of maybe the most successful open source projects. One is Mozilla Firefox. Mozilla from the Mozilla Foundation. Firefox is actually the application, and I've found this is my browser of choice. I recommend it to everybody. It went way above and beyond Internet Explorer 6. Internet Explorer 7 now out has tried to emulate some of these things, but ultimately you still end up with a much more robust and flexible tool with Firefox, and this was completely developed completely through open source mechanisms. That means that it's a group of developers, but that everything they do is transparent. You see every change that occurs. If you notice a bug or something doesn't work in yours, you submit that bug and they actually address it, and they'll take care of it. And then rather than waiting for Firefox 2 or Firefox 3.0 or something, it'll get updated in a very timely manner. So here you see Tux on the right hand side. Tux is the mascot of the Linux movement. Linux is an operating system based upon Unix, but Linux is open source, and I'm not sure what the current estimates are. At one time it was in the realm of 55-60% of internet servers, so computers serving out web pages, are Linux based, and it's in all likelihood going to become more and more prevalent as the operating system matures. These are, I think, important movements. The other thing that goes on with open source is, since it is open, you can anybody who works on it or improves upon it, they still must make their improvement open. So the vast majority of these things are available for free. You simply download them and install them on your computer. And I think, again, as educators, we have a certain obligation to be using and encouraging tools that are accessible to all. This becomes an accessibility issue for me. Every course that I teach, I try very hard to identify open source tools when they're available and when they've matured to the point where they're helpful. Because it's not only expense in terms of initial introduction, but then to our students. If our students want to be doing some of these same types of things, I think it's important that we introduce them to tools that they can access as well. And this isn't anti-capitalist, because really what this is anti-closed systems. I often use the analogy of our roads. Imagine if our roads were developed by one company, and only vehicles that were sold by or endorsed by that company could use those roads. The word processor now is essentially our vehicle for a lot of things, and to think that we have to use one particular company's word processor or one particular company's browser, I think is difficult in this day and age. In the initial development of them, you can understand the costs associated with that. But now that they've become such mainstream tools, it's a little more difficult to see how it benefits society to have things that are done behind closed doors and little transparency to see how they actually work. Okay, so that little overview, hopefully a little more depth to some of the things that were discussed by Tim, and again, we're going to go into some of these in much more detail, but please post whatever questions and comments you have down below there, and we'll talk to you again soon.